Hi everyone, this is the Acoustic Guitar Show, and today we have another very special guest introduced by this. Please welcome Mr. Oliver De Cicco.
Ciao.
Hello.
How are you?
Ciao, Oliver, as I should say.
Ciao Daniele, come stai?
Sto bene, grazie. Our Italian readers are, not complaining, but the interviews are mostly with American and English sound engineers. So interviews will be translated on the magazine in Italian, but right now this is happening in English.
Good.
So
È meglio così.
meglio così. Thank you so much for being here with us, and you have a great history with acoustic guitar, but you have done amazing things as a sound engineer. Would you like to say just a couple of things about your history and how it brought you here?
Well, I mean, the way I started with the studio was I had no idea I was going to have a recording studio. I was interested in electronic music when I was in college back in the early 70s, and where I went to school, they had a Moog synthesizer, and there was basically an electronic music program that no one was taking. So I was able to sign on and spend a lot of time in the studio there playing around with tape machines and a synthesizer, and just trying to compose, make experimental music. And long story short is I moved out to San Francisco from the East Coast, and I had a couple of tape machines and a little mixer I built from a kit, and I was just using it to record, my own stuff. And I happened to get laid off from my job right around the same time these guys were looking to do some recording, and I had a space, it was my jam space, and they came in and recorded, and I thought, well, maybe I should try to have a recording studio. I had no idea what I was doing. I'm basically a self-taught recording.
Like the best adventures.
Yeah, well, you learn. I mean, I didn't even know how to wire a microphone cable when I started. And
which year are we talking about?
1976.
Oh, great.
Yeah, you probably weren't even born yet, right?
I was. I probably look younger than you think, but I was.
Anyhow, so I started the studio. It was a little, basically 2 Revox tape machines, and then I put a little bit. I got some money. I put a little bit more money into it. I got a 4-track machine, so I was recording a lot of. We'd get a group in, and with 4 tracks, you don't have that many options. So we would set the band up and record them live and put them on 2 tracks, and then we'd use the other 2 tracks for overdubs. And then from 4-track, it went to 16-track. And that's when this thing started getting a lot more serious. And from there, I kept on building the studio up and getting better equipment. And by the time I ended the studio, it was designed it had been rebuilt several times, and it was designed for acoustic recording. And I had a Neve console, an 8068, which is a great sounding machine board, and I had a Studer 24-track with Dolby SR. So that was an analog studio, but pretty much top of the line analog, the best analog.
Yeah, this is pre-digital.
I got out when it got digital. The writing was on the wall. When people started coming to the studio with ADAT machines, I knew that was it. The studio that I knew, that whole model was going to be gone. And I've been doing it for 28 years. I was kind of done. I had other things I wanted to do. I'm interested in experimental music. I built a whole series of invented instruments, and we had a group called Mobius Operandi that performed on those. That's kind of gone by the wayside because it was too hard to get gigs. And now I'm making kinetic sound sculpture. So I'm still making sound, but I'm just not recording it so much anymore. In fact, ironically, I don't even have any recording equipment.
Great.
You know.
I saw you have a great history. You are involved in some great recordings. For example, I was looking at, I think, Bill Frisell Quartet, that
Right.
record, which is one of my favorites of Bill Frisell. So was very happy to discover it was you behind the record. And that's an amazing sounding record and an amazing record. And I saw that you had to do with a lot of acoustic music, not just acoustic guitar.
Right. No, the studio was really set up as for acoustic live recording. We did a lot of live jazz sessions. You know, we set up the band, you know, the whole group and do it direct to 2-track.
Yeah.
You know, and mix it live. And, you know, the sessions would, you know, they come in and we'd be done in a day. You know, at the end of the day, we'd sequence a record together. And I mean, those guys, you know, when you have players who can play, it's a big difference. I mean, it's when you're sitting there piecing something together, punching in a part because someone can't seem to get their part, then it becomes a different issue. But for most of the recording, I mean, I've recorded everything from punk rock for the Dead Kennedys to Henry Kaiser and Fred Frith and, you know,
very experimental music.
Yeah, John Zorn. And good musicians, I mean, it all starts with the musician. You know, this is always the case. The musician and the song. You have a good song, you have a good musician. You don't have to do very much. And a good sounding instrument, I mean, a good musician, even on a mediocre instrument, can make it sound good, which is not true in the inverse. You know, there's always that, if I had a better guitar, I'd be a better player. But
okay.
So yeah, you know, a lot of it really has to do with the source of the material. And then my job was just basically to capture it as best I could. You know, fortunately, I had good mic preamps and I had good microphones. And, you know, that's...
We will get to that. We will get to that a little more in depth.
So, you know, the idea was to not necessarily put my stamp on the sound, you know, although I do have, you know, I have a particular aesthetic. But to try, you know, you're working with the client and you got the artist there and they're asking you for, you know, your job, if you're doing your job right, you're invisible. You know,
you get out of the way. You stay out of the way.
Get out of the way. It's when you have to start adding a lot of, you know, icing on the cake. You know, there's a lot of icing and no cake, you know. There's you know, effects, you put, you know, everything, backwards reverb and all this other stuff that, you know, at that point, it's like, we used to call it, the term was turd polishing. Do you know what a turd is?
Not exactly.
It's, what would the Italian, stronzo? No, that's.
Okay, that's a good one.
You know, yeah, anyhow.
Okay, I got the idea.
The idea, right? So, you know, if you have good material, again, it all comes down to that. Good material, good player, you can make great records. You don't need, I mean, you need a decent amount, you need a good preamp, you know, and a good microphone, I think, is the two. Those two, that's the key. And now with the digital, you know, I don't even know. I mean, digital, I know, has gotten a lot better, and everybody's using it now. But, you know, that's the key element. I mean, you know, we always talk about the recording chain, and the chain is only as strong as the weak link. So if you have a great microphone, but you have a lousy preamp,
yeah, sure,
it's not going to help you that much, you know.
So you, as I told you, we are coming from fingerstyle guitar history as a magazine, the website, everything. That's the reason. That's the main reason we are here for. And you are connected to one of those masterpieces that once in a while happen to happen. I call, you were involved, you will tell us, the story. You were involved in Michael Hedges' Aerial Boundaries. To me, I don't know, you were so much into jazz. I call Aerial Boundaries the Kind of Blue of fingerstyle guitar. Kind of Blue, to me, is a turning point from a world to another one.
Right.
I don't know if you think the same, but that's just my feeling. I believe Aerial Boundaries and Michael Hedges, as Miles Davis was at the time, was like a turning point. Everything changed. We are still seeing those effects after so many years. And you were involved. Can you tell us something about that experience? Whatever.
Well, I'm trying to remember back because we recorded that record like 38.
Was it done in your studio?
No, it was done in 4 different studios.
Okay.
All right, there was 4 engineers on that project. I can't even remember the name of the song that we recorded here. We did one piece, but I mean, I knew Michael, and Stephen Miller was producing the record, and Michael was just he was just a phenomenal player, and his use of open tunings and his two-handed tapping, and I mean, it was like no one was doing stuff like that, and there was it ushered in a whole era of people playing like that, like when Charlie Hunter comes to mind, and so I mean, I wish I could be a little bit more specific about that record because it's been a long time and a lot of stuff has come through the studio, but I do remember first of all that he was such a great guy and easy to work with and just an amazing player. I mean, everything sounded good coming out of him. It gets back to my original point. We didn't really have to do very much to that. I mean, I wish I could say, there was a magic thing that we did, but
no, sure,
it wasn't.
Do you remember if there was a microphones mixed with the internal pickups he had in the guitar? Because I believe that record was recorded with multiple sources, right?
Well, yeah, usually, a lot of times with guitar, I mean, in general, I would use, especially if it's going to be a solo instrument, I would use a combination. If there was if he had a pickup in the instrument, we would take that feed. But primarily, what I used to rely on were I used a pair of condenser mics relatively close to the guitar itself, and then mics in the room. And then you try to blend. It depends on how big a sound you're trying to get. You could make the guitar sound huge. It's just or it can make it really intimate. And it just depended on what the producer and the artist wanted, and leave yourself a lot of options, so that maybe the room mics were just feeding into reverb. Maybe the direct was going into a little bit of chorusing or something, and just being mixed in underneath. So it was fatten the instrument up, make it sound. You could make it sound very big. You could do a very wide stereo spread and make the instrument the entire soundscape, or you could narrow it down, or it just really depends. It was so dependent on the artist and the producer and their vision. And my
Do you remember?
job,
I'm sorry.
My job is basically to help facilitate what they wanted. It's if I was producing, it'd be a different story. Then it's like I have my input. But I think being a recording engineer is a lot like being the cinematographer on a film. You have the director, who's basically the producer, and then he has a vision, and then the cinematographer is trying to capture that vision, and that's what we would do. Because if you think about it, like a microphone is like a camera lens. It doesn't hear the way your ear hears, and just the same way as a camera lens doesn't see the way your eye sees. And so that's a pretty good analogy of how that worked.
Sure. Do you remember the microphone you used at the time on the song you
Yeah,
recorded?
yeah. I used Neumann KM84s that had been modified by Klaus Hein. He was doing, I think it's called German Masterworks is the name of his company, and he was taking Neumanns and sort of juicing them up a little bit. And the 84s were a really nice sounding microphone. They were really good on acoustic. They sounded great on acoustic guitar. They sounded great
Yeah.
on a lot of things. And, you know, basically, you know, I'd have the mics were spread. I'd have one mic, maybe I'll have to do it in inches, but you know, maybe 18 inches away from the guitar, facing a little off axis and down, sort of below the bridge, between the bridge and the bottom curve of the guitar, pointing away, you know, pointing down slightly, you know, instead of pointing straight at the guitar, off axis a little bit, so you didn't get the proximity effect and a lot of bass buildup. And then the other guitar, the other pickup was up near, I used to like to put it around where the 12th fret or where the neck met the body, up around there, to get a little bit of the attack of the fingers. And then,
So they were pretty close one to the other.
well, they were about, I'll have to.
Oh, let me see if I can just highlight you. Okay.
About that, well, let me get in there. That far apart.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's kind of how we would do it. And then I'd have, you know, either some room mics out there, like maybe a large, you know, like a couple of U87s or, you know, larger diaphragm mics a little further away, 10 feet away, you know, like what's that, 3 meters away or so.
Yeah.
And then
3
again,
meters one from the other and 3 meters from Michael.
yeah, sort of in a
Triangle.
I mean, just basically trying to use the room so that we could, you know, get, you know, get a little bit of distance on the sound. And then you could, like I said earlier, you can use that to, as your reverb feeds, you know. So it just, you know, it introduced, you know, some phase information and then, you know, we'd pan everything, like the guitar was panned wide, you know, usually, especially if it's a solo guitar, you know, so we spread it out. And, you know, that was the major technique, although sometimes we would do what they call coincident pair or XY recording, where you have the two microphones with their
like this.
Like this at a 45-degree angle.
Okay.
Guitar, and you get your stereo image that way. I usually like to go with the wider space sound. That was sort of my approach. And, you know,
did you mix the song? Did you mix the song or you just recorded it?
I think we mixed it too. I don't
So
remember.
those two microphones you had, you probably, how did you mix them? Like a little spread or completely left, right?
It would depend. You know, probably, you know, I probably pulled them in a little bit. You know, they weren't totally left, right, but they were. Okay. I mean, you know, because what that space pair did is it gave the guitar a certain size. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So if you wanted to make it really wide, you pan it full out. But, you know, usually we'd bring it in a little bit, and then the room mics would be out, panned out, you know, pretty far. And then any direct signal would probably be center and back in the mix.
To give focus and attack.
Yeah,
and everything.
Something, you know, just to add another dimension to the sound. You know, there's a lot of ways to record. And,
yeah, sure.
You know, the whole thing, it's all about trying stuff out. I mean, because my technique might not work for somebody else. And,
yeah, sure.
You know, it's you ask 5 engineers about how to record something and you'll get 5 different answers. And
yeah, sure.
They're all right, you know?
Yeah.
So what I tell people is, you know, don't be afraid to try things out. Even if it seems crazy, try it. You might find something, you know.
Yeah,
And,
sure.
and what we used to do, what I like to do was I would EQ and get my sound to tape and not record flat and then mix it, change, EQ it later. I felt, and I would do this with just about everything I recorded, is that the idea was to go for a sound and make some choices and build up the music right from the beginning. And I know some engineers like to record everything flat, everything dry, and then play with it later. But I found that if we worked the other way, you would start to make the music happen right from the beginning. And so when it came time to mix, pretty much all you had to do was put the faders in a straight line, maybe add some reverb and effects and stuff, but the levels would all be there. So it was called recording in place. So you set your monitors up at a certain level, and then you put things onto tape and at the sound where they sounded right in the mix. And then if you'd look over at the machine, at the meter, like if you're recording drums, the bass drum is slapping the meter, it's really hitting hard. The snare drum too, but the cymbals are hardly moving, but yet they're there. So if you record them loud, then what you're doing is you're just basically lopping off, you're truncating the transient response of those high frequencies, so the cymbals don't sound open anymore. So, it's that kind of approach to trying to really hear the instrument. And, we, again, because I was doing a lot of acoustic recording, try to capture the sound and then, create this illusionary space once you put everything together, so that's kind of how we did it,
And the preamps were the Neve
the Neves. Well,
on the desk.
Yeah, but that I didn't have the Neve at that time. I had an Auditronics console when I recorded Hedges, and that was an American-made board out of, I think, Nashville or something, and it had very little in the signal path. It was very clean signal path, and the EQ on those was more like tone controls than it was real EQ, because it had four bands and 2 frequencies per band, but they used basically an LC network, an inductor and a capacitor. It was mostly a tone control. It wasn't really radical EQ, so you couldn't get,
something
really,
like a Trident, something like that.
Tridents were more aggressive. That was a more aggressive EQ. I mean, and the Neve EQs were more aggressive too. You could do more with them. The Neves were a lot, they had a lot more frequencies.
Yeah.
They were much better. I mean, the Neve is, in my opinion, were the best sounding preamps, in a console ever, really. They had those great transformers that would, kind of fatten up the sound, give it some harmonic, interest to it. And then they had a really high, the bandwidth was really wide, so it would pass signal up, to the 40K or something. So it sounded really open. It had a lot of openness to it, yet it had a real richness because of the transformers. And, I mean, it was a great design, and that's why they're so expensive today, because there's not much, like I don't know if there's any plug-in that can do what that preamp did,
Yeah, there's I think there's some great stuff today. I saw that some engineer has switched to in the box. They completely sold the studios and equipment, and they're just mixing with a laptop. But of course, I think if you have, especially if you're recording, if you have a great desk or great preamps or stuff, I believe that's not that's not beatable at the moment.
Well,
but I think there's some great stuff around.
Yeah, no, there is. I mean, again, and in all honesty, I haven't kept up with what's going on anymore. anymore.
Yeah, sure.
And, you have to remember that when when we were recording analog, you're recording to tape, you have a lot of constraints. You don't have an infinite amount of takes you can take,
Yeah.
So if guitar player came in and did a solo and we had one track open and he goes, well, I could do it better. And you go, you sure? Because we have to erase that one. And then, either he gets it on the first take or it's now 40 takes later and, it doesn't sound like anything. So, that's kind of, we had a lot of constraints. We had a lot of parameters that we had to work inside of, which helps to focus things, I feel. When you have, if you have a situation where you've kept 10 guitar solos, who's going to listen to all 10 of those and decide, or, sometimes they keep they keep 100 solos. So you're postponing the decision making until much later. And, my feeling always was that you're in the moment of the music and try to keep that in your head. And because, if you listen to it a week later, you're in a different headspace. And, so I don't know, that's kind of how I would work. And, again, every engineer's got a different approach. So there's no right or wrong.
Yeah, sure. So you are a fan of comp and EQ in. I mean, you directly tried always to record compression, EQ as much as you could.
I would put EQ. I'd go for the sound. That usually that entailed EQ. I didn't always reach for the compressor though. Especially with acoustic instruments. And a lot of times I didn't find the need for that. When you're dealing with electric or bands and you're trying to more rock and roll stuff, that's a different mindset. And then you might squash the entire mix. You run everything through a stereo limiter at the end. I mean, limiting and compression have its place. It's just another tool, but just because you have that sitting in the rack doesn't mean you necessarily have to, you should plug into it,
Sure.
And again, it comes down to what does the music dictate? And, like you said earlier, get out of the way, so, that's the kind of, I'm not necessarily a purist, but trying to be sensitive to what I'm hearing and what's being produced out there in the studio and, trying to create some sort of reproduction of that event because, as you well know, I mean, what's happening in the room by the time the sound hits the microphone, goes down into the preamp and then goes to whatever the recording medium is and then gets played back to an amplifier. And then now you have a cardboard cone moving back and forth in a box and the sound comes out the other side. It's amazing that after all of that, it even sounds like anything, so, that's, so you're creating illusion. I mean, part of what you're doing is creating an illusion of an event.
You are using the same exact words as Jonathan Weiner, the mastering engineer. I just had him in the show, and he said the exact words you just said. You're creating an illusion in the listener, right. And this is great because it shows part of the game, which is
it's
very interesting.
It's like any other medium where you're any other like film or whatever. You're creating something that was you're taking an actual event and turning it into something that's a different kind of experience, or some facsimile of that experience may be enhanced. I mean, especially if a record was done over a course of like a couple of months where different players were coming in at different times, there was no actual event, and you're creating one. It's different when you have like a live, you have a live jazz quartet set up in the studio. That's the event. Get it as make it sound as good as you possibly can. There's definition on every instrument and, everything is clear. It's not muddy. You know, you have enough isolation that you can really focus in on each instrument and then blend them together so that, you know, you can hear everything, you know, good mix, you know.
Yeah. So as I told you, we are speaking to a lot of people. Today, everyone has a small studio in the house. So
Mm-hmm.
we are trying to ask people like you, and especially you coming from, if you think of that, such a similar thing. Because when you set up microphones and you just want to go to two track, it's pretty uh, similar to someone in a room with a mic or two going to a computer and recording a guitar. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that's very important. At that time, it's very important the placement, how you perform what you're performing, uh, moving the microphones instead of tweaking forever with the cue. So, uh, which is a few tips from your experience. What could you say possibly? Get one microphone, get two microphones, maybe cheaper, but get two. Uh, what do you feel like saying to someone approaching recording?
Well, if you're going to use two microphones, I always like to use a pair of the same kind of microphone.
Perfect. This
You
is
know,
a
that's the way
great tip.
you know, I would buy microphones in pairs,
Yeah.
you know. So I have like, you know, because I find that I like to have that. That is my approach. Um, if you're only going to have one microphone, um, you know, it depends on what you're trying to do. If you're doing like, you know, acoustic instruments and you're doing vocals, you know, then I prefer condenser microphones. And for something like that, if you only had one mic, I'd go for a larger diaphragm microphone. So you could do vocals with it, you know, because the small diaphragm mics sometimes don't, well, I never had really good result. You know, we always recorded on the big diaphragm mics for the
So if you are
vocals.
recording a single guitar instrumental, you can get a pair of two similar the same microphone,
Yeah, I
maybe
would,
small diaphragm.
yeah.
But if you're recording vocals too, and you know that before, you better get one large diaphragm microphone and then add something.
Right. If you can only have one microphone, then get
Yeah.
the that's the most versatile. And if you know, so it will record vocals. You can use it on your instrument. You know, I mean, again, a good microphone is worth the investment.
Yeah,
You know,
definitely.
that's, you know, a good microphone and a decent preamp. And a lot of the stuff now, I guess they have good analog to digital converters, so it's not so
Yeah,
much.
good preamps.
Yeah, it's not the issue anymore. But a good preamp with some EQ would be nice, just to be able to shape the sound if you need to. Mic placement is a big deal. I mean, if you get you know, if you have a condenser cardioid microphone and you have it in close to the instrument, it's going to build up bass. You know, you're going to get the proximity effect.
Yeah.
So either you turn the mic off axis to the sound source, so you cut some of that low end out, because it'll start booming, especially if you know, on guitar, it can get very boomy.
Effects is for people who are not aware maybe of all the technical stuff is just not pointing, for example, at the sound hole, which projects a lot of bass frequencies. So if you stick the microphone in front of the sound hole, of course you have just boom and
Right.
no
Yeah,
music.
I usually did not put the microphone in front of the sound hall.
Yeah, yeah, sure, of course.
That was not my favorite place to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was, you know, that kind of I'm losing my train of thought here. Yeah, so, you know, a good microphone, decent, you know, a good preamp. Those are the two things that I think are the key to getting good recordings. I mean, in terms of equipment. Now, the other aspect is, what does your room sound like? What are you recording in? You know,
Yeah.
if you're in a really dead room, well, you'll get a lot of the direct sound of the instrument, but you're getting nothing from the room as a as a player. And it's nice to have, you know, a really dead room is not fun to play in, you know. So, you know, if you can if you have a room that has a lot of, different broken up surfaces, and, you have some absorption, you have some reflection, it just makes for a more natural environment. If you have a good acoustic, a room that sounds good and you're in close enough to the mic, to the instrument, you should be able to get good result all the time. People, you hear stories of people, bands renting a house and they record one thing in the bathroom, and then, again, it comes down to experimenting. It's like, oh, let's put the guitar in the bathroom and see what it sounds like.
Yeah. This is very interesting because a lot of people recording home are just, stuffing things on the walls, like trying to, deaden the room mostly. But I'm getting, you're not the first one, and this is very interesting. I'm getting this kind of a suggestion. Let the room do its job. Not kill. Don't kill the room. Maybe find a good spot, because if you point at a different angle or whatever, you can get a different sound. So this is a very good suggestion, even to, not to spend too much money, try to kill the room, and then you discover it wasn't the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, killing the room is not, I'm not a big fan of that. I mean, one thing that you can do if you have the space to store them is you can make, like freestanding panels that are, sort of have a, maybe a wood surface on one side that's not necessarily flat, but has some, it's broken up a little bit. On the back side, you could have, something that's a little bit deader. Make a few of these, and then you can turn them around and tune your room, and, and set them up around where you're playing, and create a little bit of an environment. That's an inexpensive way to go. I mean, because, if you're going to soundproof a room, so it's, like no sound is getting in from the outside, which is what, we had to do when I built the studio, is that, we had to do the room within a room.
Yeah.
In order to get, which is very expensive and took a long time to build. But that's what you needed in a commercial studio if you're going to be able to work around the clock,
Yeah. Sure.
But for most people at home, and which is, I'm assuming a lot of your listeners, it's just, make your room sound good to your ear, and it'll sound better to the microphone.
Yeah, great tips. Are you a fan of close miking, or you just experiment every time looking for the best?
I'm, again, I was never really close. I mean, well, it depends. If you're recording in an ensemble situation and you need to get isolation between instruments, sometimes it's better to come in a little close, a little tighter with the mic, bring the gain down. This way the mic isn't hearing much of what else is happening in the room.
Of course. Less bleed.
The bleed, sometimes bleed is your friend, and sometimes it just muddies everything up, And the other thing that's important that people don't think about very much is the phase of your microphones and stuff. In relation to other, if you're doing multiple microphones, it's one thing that's good to do is make sure that all of your microphones are wired the same way, so they're all in phase to one another. So if you set two of them up in front of like an amplifier, they're both reading in phase. And a lot of times, you'd have to, because sometimes some manufacturers, they use, like, instead of pin 2 hot, they use pin 3 hot on the XLR connector. And, so one thing, whenever I got a new microphone in, is we set it up against the known microphone and check the phase and make sure that the mic's in phase. And then, if you have a phase switch on your mixer, on your preamp or whatever, sometimes check, flip the phase and see, if things sound better. Usually that's more important with multiple miking. With one mic, it's not an issue. But if you have several mics going, you might want to check the phase, and that's something that gets overlooked.
Today you have a phase inversion in every DAW, in every digital audio workstation. So that's probably solving the problem, I think.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
not.
That's that's basically does the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. Even if you had a problem, you can solve it by
Right.
flipping the phase, right?
I mean, yeah, and you can also fix up all your mistakes, and you can check, you can get you can get the timing better, and you can get that bad note out and take
Yeah.
a take, or let's repeat the chorus 3 times. Just keep pasting it in. I'm not a fan.
Yeah, no, me too. But these are really, really important tips. So if someone gets 2 microphones, they better check the phase when they record. This is
Yeah,
something we can say.
yeah, you could. Yeah. That's a pretty safe
Because
bet.
many people just don't know. They get 2 microphones, they record, and they say this sounds like crap. Why? And they just don't know that if you flip the phase, the sound completely changes.
Right.
So it's
Yeah,
it's very
it can
important.
go from being very thin to being full.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So I mean, that's just one aspect of it. It's something to think about. Again, coming from the analog world, we had to deal with, uh, you know, you had to, deal with that stuff going to tape because once it's there, you can EQ and you can do other stuff, but you don't have that flexibility. I mean, unless you start cutting tape and editing, and which we've done a lot of too, where, you know, just basically build a track from a lot of different takes. Sometimes with some of the classical quartet stuff I've done, they wanted it to be perfect and they just work on one section until they got it. And then we'd edit, the 24 track tape together and, put the thing together that way. And it would take as long to cut it up as it did to record it. So, but you get, a perfect result. And nowadays you can, with Pro Tools, there's so much you can do. It's just amazing.
yeah. It's
You know,
anything.
no, but the limited amount of Pro Tools work I did, this was after the studio closed. We were recording my group, and I didn't like mixing on a mouse. You can set everything and it's just, nail every level, everything is perfect, but it sounds just kind of flat. It doesn't have any life. When we were mixing, on the 24 track, because I didn't have automation on the console, you would play the mix.
Yeah, definitely.
And so
You had to.
like when the solo came, you might goose the fader a little bit, just jiggle it, get a little bit of, put some, almost like, vibrato or something, like shaking the string on a guitar a little bit. Just, and you could be more dynamic with what was happening. So it was like playing, it was like a performance,
Yeah, sure.
And sometimes it was like, wow, that was a really good mix, but you couldn't necessarily repeat it, I
Yeah,
mean, you could get close, but then, on the other hand, you'd mix one song 5 times and you'd make notes about what the differences were between the things, and then you listen back to it the next day or 2 days later, and they all sound the same.
yeah, definitely.
But at the
Oh,
time, that little little boost of the hi-hat in the chorus was really important. They had to hear
yeah.
that. And then later on, it's like, why did we mix this one again? That first one was good. It's like, oh, because you wanted the hi-hat up in the chorus. And they go, oh yeah, I don't notice a difference. Because I mean, the other thing that people don't realize is that the psychoacoustics of music, I mean, your ear is connected to your brain, and
Yeah,
and so your brain is interpreting things that are going on, and sometimes filling in the blanks. Like I've had, and I hate to admit this, but there would be times in the studio where you're like playing with an effect and you're turning it up, and go a little bit more, and then you look over and the unit's in bypass, and it's like,
yeah,
okay, what was I hearing?
yeah.
My brain was telling me I was hearing it, and I wasn't.
It
So
happens all the time.
yeah, it happens a lot. And but that just goes to show you that, you know, it's a crazy medium, you know. Recording is it's exciting and it's weird, you know.
Yeah. Going before leaving you, going for guitar and vocals, would you use a dynamic too, maybe on the vocals or on the guitar?
Well, I mean, I used condensers mostly on any acoustic instruments. I use like my dynamic mics. I usually used on drums and stuff like that. Like I had, you know, Sennheiser 421s, which you can use for vocals. I mean, it's a versatile microphone. And you know, I would use, you know, Shure SM57 on the snare drum, and you know, like a D112, you know, AKG on the bass drum, or a 421. But usually for anything that had a lot of transients, or I really wanted to capture the nuance of the instrument, I preferred the condensers. I always thought that they sound more open, and they captured the transient response better. And you know, that was just how I like to work.
Yeah, sure.
You know?
Sure. Well, this was very interesting. Very interesting. This is what we're going for. So, unless there is something more that you would like to add for our acoustic guitar readers, I think we can first say thank you for doing this. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your time. Grazie per il tuo tempo.
All right. So take care. Be safe. Where are you right now? What city are you in?
I'm in Rome.
You're in Rome. That's a great town. I love Rome.
Yeah. Where are you? I'm
in San Francisco.
Oh, I think that's a great town too. I've never been there.
No, it's nice, but yeah, I've been to Rome a few times, and I always enjoyed it. And do you know? I know a couple of Italian guitar players. Do you know Beppe Gambetta?
I sure do know Beppe. Yeah, I played with him. I think you made a record with him. I told myself I have to remember this, and I forgot it. Talking to you.
Well, anyhow, if you see Beppe, tell him, give him my regards.
Yeah, sure.
And
absolutely.
There was a band called Red Wine from Milan. They were a bluegrass band. Paolo.
I'm not sure I know them, but
But you know Beppe. Anyhow, if you see him,
I know Beppe. Yes, very well.
Give him my regards.
Absolutely. So thank you again for your time, which is precious as always, as all of ours. And it was great talking to you. Thank you for sharing everything. I will kick you out of the room and then say goodbye in private.
Okay. Ciao.
Goodbye, Oliver De Cicco.
Yeah, bye.
Thank you, everyone, for watching this. I will see you on the next episode. Thank Oliver De Cicco for for doing this with us. Goodbye.